All right, so good morning, guys. Getting close to the end here. Before we begin, I just want to mention I've posted some things that you may find helpful. First of all, if you go to the forums, where's your forums? Where's my forums? Forums, I think maybe is up top. Yeah. So if you click on forums, I've just, under the announcements, I've done final exam practice questions. So I did the breakdown for the various areas on the exam. So I've got formulations, 14 to 18 questions, safety, same, actions. Latin names, there'll be 6 of them, and then cases, total of 75 questions. And then these are some examples, just sort of the ways I might word the questions. Obviously, I kind of try to make them generic for you to give you a couple ideas. If we have time, we'll go through these cases together as an example of how to do stuff, but that will be next week, I hope. Okay, so that's one thing I think will be helpful for you guys. Does that help? Do you think? Is that a good thing? Did you guys use that for the midterm? The next thing I did was, if you would like, so I put on a couple of links on today's lecture. Here's a brief description of herbs we discussed. So what I did was, on my website, you can go in here, and what I've done is I've done a search for Bot101. So I've only included the herbs I think that we've kind of discussed. I don't know if I did all of them, but I certainly included a bunch of them. And what I've done is written a little brief description to explain how it is. We're discussing this anyways, but you might want to just read this. It won't take you very long to do it. If you have, it's free to access this. I didn't make it so you have to pay, so I made this like a little free accessing. If you want to sign in and look at the rest of it, you can. And that's if you buy it for $20 and you want to support the website and me, that would be great. I don't think it's very expensive, and you will definitely use it if you have it, or you should use it. So that's one thing I've done. So that's a little free thing you can read there. Another optional thing you can do is I've written a bunch of blogs on various things that are related to the course. So I kind of started writing some blogs, anti-ulcer herbs, carminatives. It's a little bit more description. So when you go into it, a lot of these herbs are ones that we've talked about, a little bit of a description. There's some research references linked there. PubMed, I don't know why they're not linking up, but they're at the bottom there. You can look at them that way. Some of these we've discussed in class, some of them we haven't, but for the most part, I think these ones are. Some stuff related to IBS. What else did I include? Foods for constipation. That was a good one. So anyways, you might find some of these articles useful. Some of them won't be relevant, but you can check those out, okay? And finally, what I want to do is get through the herbs today. And then after that, we will talk about some cases, okay? I believe we left off on carminative, or on peppermint. So with peppermint, peppermint's a great herb, and I think it's widely available around the world. I think it grows just about anywhere. If you ever want to grow it yourself, you plant it in the ground, it will just take over. It's a pretty hardy plant that will grow just about anywhere. You put a little bit in the ground around your place, it'll just sort of spread into your yard. So it's easy to cultivate. Peppermint is a member of the mint family, and obviously, and because of the family it belongs to, it is rich in essential oils, and these essential oils are going to be some of the main active ingredients. So menthol is a monoterpene, which is an essential oil. It's the primary active ingredient, but appreciate I'm mentioning menthol, but there are other essential oils that are in peppermint as well. And so it might have very small amounts of other ones that might be found in things like pine trees or other essential oils, but that's the predominant one. And menthol, like all the essential oils, its main active action associated with the menthol is basically being a carminative, and it will basically cause a dilation of the capillaries around the gut, helping increase blood supply to the digestive tract. It'll relax the smooth muscles in the digestive tract, so it'll help food to descend, so it's not sitting in the stomach too long. If you have gas and bloating and cramping, it'll help relieve that. So it's indicated for all those types of conditions where someone has indigestion or fullness in the stomach. It can help with that. There's a slight antispasmodic effect for the cramping. I would say in addition to the effects in the digestive tract, it's often used as an antitussive. So you see a lot of cough drops will have menthol in it. So it has a bit of a very slight, helps to relieve coughing. It helps when you inhale it to sort of loosen up a little bit of the phlegm that's in your chest. And so you'll see it in some of the chest rubs that a few of the different brands will make that contain eucalyptus, and menthol is usually a big component. Also, applied topically, menthol oil, peppermint oil, would have a rubefacient effect and help with muscle pain. So another thing. Now, I want to mention that although peppermint tea, for example, contains menthol, basically when you make the tea, it'll all sort of disperse throughout the water and eventually settle up to the top. But there are other components in peppermint, presumably things like flavonoids that have some antispasmodic effects as well, because I've seen that with other herbs in the mint family, that the flavonoid component have an antispasmodic effect in addition to having these carminative action associated with the essential oils. One of the things that you can do is you can just get people to have peppermint tea, or you can ask them to get a peppermint oil capsule. Now, appreciate pure essential oil behaves slightly differently than doing the peppermint tea. I would say it would be stronger. The research that I've looked at shows that for patients with, let's say, abdominal pain, like an IBS like picture where there's just a diffuse cramping pain, it appears to have benefit for that, taking the peppermint oil capsules. And I would think that drinking peppermint tea would also have that effect. But if you're trying to get just that essential oil component, you can buy that in capsule form, but it is going to be, $50 a bottle or $40 a bottle instead of, $5 for 50 grams or 100 grams of the tea. Often I'll get patients to combine peppermint with chamomile. It makes the chamomile, which tends to be a little bit bitter, makes it more palatable, a little bit more pleasant tasting. And both peppermint and chamomile teas, they have that carminative action, antispasmodic action, kind of work synergistically for just digestive issues. And it's cheap. You can buy it anywhere, and it's good to drink it on a regular basis. No safety concerns that I can really think of, with the exception of being because it's carminative, and this applies to any carminative, it will relax the lower esophageal sphincter that keeps the stomach contents from traveling up into the esophagus. So if you take a lot of peppermint tea or peppermint oil directly into your stomach, there is the risk that that lower esophageal sphincter will relax and you'll get a little bit of reflux occurring. And that would be the same thing with any kind of spicy foods that people are consuming that are rich in essential oils. That being said, it's not typically a problem. Where you might see the problem is if someone overeats and then they take a whole bunch of peppermint afterwards, because you've got that built up pressure from overeating, and take the peppermint, they might burp and be like, "Ooh," get a little bit of regurg and find that unpleasant. The other situation is if you had a whole bunch of peppermint tea or any kind of carminative right before bed, and then you lay down, then just because of the active gravity, you could have it, relaxed where the stomach acid flows up. Okay. So fennel is primarily a carminative like peppermint. So fennel oil is pretty much the same from a digestive standpoint as peppermint oil. I don't think you can really tease any major differences between the two from how they'll work in the digestive tract. Um, the main difference between peppermint oil, which the menthol is the main active ingredient, and the fennel oil, where you have anethol, that black licorice tasting essential oil. The main difference between the two of them is the pathways that they're made. One is made through is a phenylpropanoid or phenylpropene, so it's made through a slightly different pathway than the terpenoids are made. But from a functional standpoint and what it does in the body, not a big difference. I would say if you were to look at fennel and peppermint, the main difference between the two of them is the fact that the structure of the anethol, it has the potential, I believe, to interact with dopamine receptors. And when you have dopamine receptors in the pituitary gland, when they're modulated, you have a modulating effect on the release of prolactin in the body. So, generally speaking, dopamine goes up, prolactin goes down, or dopamine goes down, prolactin goes up. So, there are certain herbs that have a hormone regulating action. One of the big ones is Vitex, that does so by interacting with these dopamine receptors. Now, fennel, it appears to have a modulating effect there because we know that historically fennel was used and still is used by some to promote milk production, lactation. So it's a galactagogue. So taking fennel internally in high amounts will help women produce more milk, which is fine. Now, there are some cautions because it has this hormone regulating effect that women shouldn't overdo it if they're breastfeeding because you don't want to have too much of this anethol going into the breast milk, at least theoretically. I don't know what the research shows. That would be one thing. And just in general, too much essential oils in high amounts. I would be cautious about taking them internally while breastfeeding or pregnant, just because of the fact that these can enter into circulation and get into the breast milk, or if you're pregnant, could affect the baby. And the research is limited. Now, a cup of fennel tea or peppermint tea, not likely a big deal. If you're taking it and just drinking it, nonstop or taking in the capsules in high amounts, there could be problems. So it's kind of a caution. It's not a strict contraindication, more of a caution. So that would be the main difference between fennel and peppermint. I would say that generally speaking, sometimes the mints are believed to have more of a drying up and I don't know how they do this, but kind of a dry up milk if you're consuming a lot of peppermint and some of the other teas, spearmint as well. Some women don't like taking them while they're nursing because they find that it reduces milk supply. While fennel would do the opposite, it would increase milk supply. And so if you have a woman who's breastfeeding and you want to give them a bit of a carminative, some fennel tea would be good for the digestion and could increase milk production as well. Now, fennel, just as an aside, is also often used for women with menstrual concerns as well. So menstrual cramps, there is benefits for that, having an antispasmodic hormone regulating effect. And it's sometimes included in cough formulas as well because it has an expectorant effect, and those essential oils have some help cough up phlegm, not unlike how the menthol does as well. So fennel and peppermint, essentially the same. They're from two different families. The peppermint's from the mint family, the fennel's from the Apiaceae family. And there are lots of other members of the Apiaceae family that are used in the culinary world. And so that would include things like anise, which tastes essentially the same as fennel. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And you find those in drinks like Zambuca, have a mixture of usually fennel and anise in it. Caraway, also, cumin, they all have those little seeds. And if you look at the photo on the left, the seeds would be found in the flower has that umbrella-like shape, and that's from the Apiaceae family. And so other members of that family, those little seeds are rich in those essential oils. You can also eat the root of fennel. It's a vegetable, a non-starchy vegetable that's used in Mediterranean cuisines, and certainly we cook with that sometimes as well. And you can detect there's relatively, it's less concentrated, but the essential oils are also in that. So fennel is a useful carminative. Like I said, some herb books may include other herbs like dill, cumin, celery seed. Um, they're all good carminatives, and you can use them interchangeably. And I don't really know if there's a strong distinction if you were to compare fennel to the other ones. They're all going to be very, very similar in their actions. The fennel is going to have a little bit more of that phytoestrogenic or hormone regulating effects to it. So in general, pregnancy, breastfeeding, use it with caution. There's maybe some current concerns with that. I don't think it's too serious in small amounts, but high amounts, yes. And I'd also say that in people with reflux, it could aggravate it. And the problem with carminid is sometimes they can help with reflux just because they get food to descend faster and can relax not just the lower esophageal sphincter, but the one that separates the stomach and the esophagus. You can get food descending that way and increase blood supply. But often it'll make it worse, especially if you lay down afterwards, after you've eaten a meal. Okay. Danielle is asking what phytochemicals contribute to the phytoestrogenic effect of fennel. I'm not sure exactly. I believe looking at the anethol, I think that anethol indirectly has a phytoestrogenic effect because it modulates the prolactin, and then that indirectly affects FSH and luteinizing hormone. That's what I think, but I haven't looked and see whether or not there's actual other flavonoids or compounds that directly interact with the estrogen receptors. So I don't know if it's a direct or an indirect phytoestrogen with that one. Okay. Now, Garden Angelica is also in the Apiaceae family, very much like the fennel. This tends to grow wild in northern Europe. Angelica, Archangelica is the Latin name. They used to call it the Archangel, I think Archangel Gabriel or one of those archangels, was connected with this. Historically, it was used as a digestive aid. It was also used for respiratory tract infections. And back in the Dark Ages, or they would use it for, I don't know if the Dark Ages or in the 800s and 1400s or whenever it was, they would use it for treating the plague when the plague was going around. Now, I don't know if it was effective for the plague, but it was used for that. Now, in addition to having a carminid effect, there is a distinctive, subtle but bitter quality to it. So it's not as bitter as gentian would be, but there is definitely a bitter constituents in there for sure when you make up a tincture of it. The carminids are going to come from the essential oils, and the essential oils have a number of different compounds, including some coumarins and furanocoumarins. And those furanocoumarins, the reason why I'm mentioning that is that we know that topically they may have that photosensitizing effect, and internally it could affect drug metabolism. I don't know how significant it is. There's not any major warnings in the textbooks, but that would be something that I would just assume by deduction. If other furanocoumarin containing herbs have that effect on phase 1 detox, I'd be concerned that this guy could as well. I've been reading some little studies that have been talking about how it also may have some antidepressant effects, presumably with some of the phenolic compounds in it. And there will be other actions that are going to be associated with the respiratory tract as well. It's going to have presumably some expectorant effects, some antimicrobial effects. So it's not a herb I use a lot in practice. Now, you do find it in a variety of digestive tonics that you can buy at the LCBO. And so often it'll be mixed in certain herbal cocktails, like chartreuse is a classic one made in France that you can find that has a number of herbs in it. And the recipe's secret, but it appears to have some Garden Angelica in it. Things like vermouth, absinthe, and gin. Even though it may not be the primary herb, this may be combined into it. I've looked on a bottle of gin before, and obviously juniper is the main herb used in gin, but they'll add other herbs in to kind of make a more complex flavor to it. And so garden angelica is sometimes added into it. Absinthe is primarily using fennel and wormwood, but they'll also add garden angelica to give, again, more complex flavor to it as well. So it's a useful herb. I do use it sometimes. It's just I don't really know why I throw it in sometimes and not other times. But we definitely have a dispensary. But it's not unlike gentian or peppermint or chamomile that I use all the time. It's more of a minor one that I use. But there's a lot of just personal preference that people may want to use it because they like the taste of it. Okay, so it's useful. A lot of these herbs are kind of repetitive in their actions, so you could choose from any one of them. Okay, so those are some main carminatives that we discussed there. Not just the slides, but also mentioning the fennel and the anise and the caraway and stuff like that. Those are all great carminatives. Now, moving away from that, we're going to talk about greater celandine or celandine. Chelidonium majus is the Latin name. Sometimes I call it Chelidonium, not greater celandine, and people will use the genus for it interchangeably with the common name. Um, Unlike the carminatives, this doesn't really have a lot of essential oils. It's an antispasmodic, but not because of its essential oils, but because it contains isoquinoline alkaloids and other types of alkaloids, in addition to things like berberine. It has chelidonine is kind of unique to it, I think. Comptazine may have some other ones as well. And you remember with berberine, it's an antimicrobial. What I find is this isn't one that I generally use as an antimicrobial for certain things as much as I use golden seal. I find that this herb's more caustic, a little bit more irritating. There are reports of it causing drug-induced hepatitis. Topically, it's been used to treat warts. So it has maybe an antiviral effect because the sap or the latex from the plant is used for warts. If you're going to think of the main indication for greater celandine, I would say it's an antispasmodic. It's a cousin of the opium poppy. And the opium poppy has isoquinoline-like alkaloids as well. I would say that the opioids are kind of like isoquinoline alkaloids. And although this doesn't have as strong an analgesic effect as you get from opium, it does appear to have that antispasmodic effect. I don't know if it's interacting with the opioid receptors, if it's doing it through that mechanism or not, but it has a stronger antispasmodic effect, I would say, than the carminatives like peppermint and fennel. It's also in some herb books used specifically for gallbladder complaints because it has a strong cholidog choleritic effect that's related to its bitter property. So it tastes very, very bitter. And there are, in Europe, there's formulas that contain greater celandine or even greater celandine alone that's been used for a number of digestive issues, including like irritable bowel syndrome, where there's a lot of spasmodic pain associated with it. And so, although I do use it sometimes, I've stayed a little bit, I've kind of stayed away from it sometimes for just general as a digestive tonic, mainly because it's a little irritating because it can cause that drug-induced hepatitis. It's not my first choice. For just pure as a digestive bitter, I'm more likely to go with gentian. Now, for gallbladder concerns, because of its antispasmodic effect and because it has an affinity for the gallbladder through its cholidog choleritic effects, I have included this in gallstone formulas, especially when there's biliary colic. So biliary colic means just cramping in the gallbladder. And so that's one of its key indications in some herbal textbooks is that it's good for gallbladder pains, and it's quite effective for increasing bile flow and bile production, and also helping to relax and not cause excessive cramping and spasming of the gallbladder. In addition to that, some books will use it as an alternative because it works through the liver, acts as a bit of a blood cleanser. Some people remember it because the flower is yellow and the sap is yellow. in the old days, they used what's called the doctrine of signature. So certain properties of the plant will be used as a way to remember the indications of it. Because it has a yellow flower, yellow sap, yellow is associated with jaundice. When your liver is not working, then the bilirubin builds up and turns your skin yellow. So it's believed that God was trying to communicate to people that this was a liver herb because of the yellow flowers. Now, I think that's been dismissed by most scientists and even rational herbalists. You can't rely on the color of the plant to determine what it's useful for. But if it helps you remember that yellow flowers makes it useful for liver conditions and gallbladder conditions, and I would use that. Now, like any of the isoquinone alkaloid-containing herbs, contraindications in pregnancy. I would not use this during pregnancy at all. I think it's just too irritating. Things like if you need a slight bitter, digestive bitter, I would be more inclined to have some, a little bit of dandelion greens and some chicory is presumably going to be a lot safer than this guy would be. So useful herb, main thing is antispasmodic, okay? And lots of other things as well. So it's kind of like golden seal with a strong antispasmodic effect. But because it's hard on the liver, I don't use it as much. And if you go into PubMed, you can find lots of case reports of it being irritating. Now, another herb called wild yam or colic root. This appears to have the main active ingredient in this are some phytosterols-like compounds. So wild yam can be used as a synthetic precursor to make estrogens and other steroid-like hormones in the body. So it doesn't contain progesterone. So it's sometimes used to make progesterone. It doesn't contain progesterone. It likely has some phytoestrogenic effects and modulates those receptors in the body to some degree, but it's not a very strong estrogen. Very slight if it has it at all. I don't know what the how exactly how strong it would be for that. So it's sometimes used for female complaints. One of the main indications for it is as an antispasmodic. And so another name for it is colic root. And so colic is just cramping pains. And so obviously, from a herbalist standpoint, the common name colic root would suggest that it's good for spasm, cramping pains, okay? So for a digestive herb, a couple of the things that I would use it for is for gallbladder cramping. So I use it in my gallbladder formulas if someone has gallstones, because one, it has that antispasmodic effect, and sometimes people will get some biliary colic, okay? Two, it appears to act as a cholagogue, so it may increase bile flow. Another thing is it has some positive effects on cholesterol levels and lowering cholesterol. The active ingredient there, one of the active ingredients, the diacetygenin, I don't know how to pronounce that, but that particular compound there, you also find it in things like fenugreek as well, that one compound. It might have some it might have a galactagogue effect as well. I don't know. I know fenugreek sometimes is considered to have one. Presumably it might, but maybe it's a different compound. So the main thing I use this for is cramping pain in the intestinal tract. It can also be used for menstrual cramps as well. So I might, because of that phytoestrogenic effect, I might use it in combination with other herbs for dysmenorrhea or menstrual cramps. If someone came in with fatty liver, high cholesterol, and gallstones or gallstones, I might throw it into my formula as well. So it's not a primary herb I give by itself, but I do use it mostly for fatty liver, gallstones, okay? Milk thistle, as I mentioned, it's I've already talked about milk thistle a few times. It's the archetypal hepatic herb, liver herb, okay? The reason why they call it milk thistle is primarily because of the way it has these little milky colors in the leaf. Now, it does appear to have a bit of a galactagogue effect. I didn't list that here. That may help with milk production, but that's not its primary indication. It's more the milk in milk thistle comes more from the way the leaves look, not from the indications for it. The primary active ingredients, as we've discussed before, are the flavonolignin. These are things like silibin. Silymarin is a mixture of a few different types of flavonolignin, including silibin. Okay, so I would use milk thistle if someone had liver concerns where there's damage to the liver. I would give it because it helps to lower the liver enzymes because it has a hepatoprotective effect. I think there's some benefits for viral hepatitis, but it's not like some researchers would say it's insignificant. I'd say there is some, but there are other things that you might want to do if someone had hepatitis C beyond just giving them milk thistle. If someone's an alcoholic and you give them milk thistle, yeah, it'll lower liver enzymes, but they're really going to stop drinking. And one of the concerns is if you think that you're protected, then it can make you more irresponsible because you're under the false sense of security, and so you're more likely to take unnecessary risks or more likely to take risks in general. That if you thought something was bad for you, you'd be more inclined to just avoid it altogether. So taking milk thistle for some people, if they're alcoholics, it might enable them, which would be a concern of mine. But that's just a little digression. So there is some hepatoprotective effects. As we discussed, it does appear to help increase liver regeneration. There's a cholagogue effect. It's not a strong bitter. I mean, I think some books call it a bitter, but if you taste the tincture, there is a bitter, but it's not bitter like gentian. It's like gentian blows your bitter taste buds. And this has a subtle bitter effect. I didn't really mention that as the primary action. Does increase bile flow, the anti-cancer and the MDR pump inhibitor effects that we discussed even in the first or second lecture is related to these flavonolignin. So I also have seen articles that say that it may have a cholesterol lowering effect. I didn't include that here. Has that antioxidant effect, so there's research that suggests that it can help with people with heart disease. I use milk thistle in my formulas for fatty liver disease. We'll talk about that later. With elevated cholesterol, and it seems to help. But it's hard for me to know because I'm throwing a few different things in my formulas. So marshmallow is a great herb to have in your dispensary in a powder form or in a leaf form or as like in bags to give to people as a tea. Okay. The main thing I use this for is I'll do cold water infusions, generally speaking, but I can make teas with it as well. So if I have the powder, I'll just get people to add a teaspoon of slippery elm powder to like a small water bottle, shake it up. And if they've got some condition like heartburn or inflammation of the gastrointestinal tract, they can just sip it throughout the day. And that can help sort of coat the esophagus and have that demulcent effect. And the way that it works is it primarily contains a lot of mucilage. And that's basically slimy, or it's not slimy when you get it. It's just a powder or a leaf that when you add water to it, it makes that slimy water that's like mucilaginous, nice and thick and slimy. I find compared to things like slippery elm, marshmallow the liquid is a lot more, is not as viscous, it's not as thick, it tends to be a little bit more watery, and so it's easier to sort of sip, and if you overdo it, it doesn't tend to solidify into a gel as much as slippery elm, but it's good. The one advantage from a demulcent standpoint that marshmallow has over slippery elm is marshmallow is pretty cheap, and I don't know what the cost is now, but you can literally probably buy like a pound of marshmallow root wholesale for about $10. And I might give out little 50-gram bags to people. And they just take a little small amount. It's really cost effective. And so let's say if a little 50-gram or 100-gram bag costs the patient $5, it's very inexpensive. And to make a tincture, to make a 1 liter tincture of marshmallow root, to make a 1 to 5 tincture, you need about 200 grams of the herb to make a 1 liter of tincture. And appreciate the patient could only then be taking 1 or 2 teaspoons of an alcohol extract because of the alcohol. You can't drink too much of it, and the dosage is much lower. And so if I really want to get like a high dose of mucilage, alcohol is one, it's really expensive. So a tincture, a liter of tincture retail would probably cost upwards of $100. A liter or 200 or a pound, which is 454 grams of dried marshmallow root, which would make liters and liters, 10 times 10 liters of tincture equivalent would cost $10. So it's when even not the patient $10, but so it's a no-brainer. You really want to get dried marshmallow in your dispensary if you're using it for things like heartburn. Both the leaf, the flower, and the roots are all effective. I usually use the root more with the ground powder. I like the powder because I can just add a spoonful to water directly and then shake it. If you get chunks of the root, what you would have to do is add it to the water, shake it up, and let it sit for a while, maybe overnight. Put it in the fridge so it can basically extract the mucilage, and in the morning you'd use it. Get them to filter off the chunks of root because they'd be still pretty hard, and then you just drink the liquid. Okay. So main indication I use it for is heartburn, gastritis, reflux would be the main things. I sometimes will use it as a bit of a gentle bulk laxative, or if someone has inflammation of the gastrointestinal tract, like lower down in the intestines with a little bit of chronic diarrhea, I might include that in a formula as well. In addition to the mucilage, it also contains flavonoids, and I think that some of these flavonoids might be responsible for its antitussive effect. And what an antitussive effect means is a tuss is a cough, so antitussive means a cough suppressant. So there's research that shows that marshmallow, it was used for respiratory tract infections as well. So you've got that, it helps coat the irritated esophagus if you've got a sore throat. And it does have an antitussive effect. I don't know if it's through just mucilage, but I suspect the flavonoid component also has a bit of a cough suppressant effect to it. And there are little studies that they've done published in PubMed that talk about its cough suppressant effect. So it's good for that. Flavonoids in general are going to have some antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. So internally for coughs, colitis, heartburn, anything with an itis afterwards, it's even used historically for urinary tract infections. I'm not sure how it exerts a demulcent effect on the urinary tract, but it has been used as a urinary demulcent. So I don't think that the mucilage itself gets to the urinary tract intact, because it will be broken down or remain in the bowels. But maybe indirectly, maybe there's other components like licorice has that other indirect demulcent effect. So I would emphasize, if you're going to use marshmallow and slippery elm, both use it in powder form as a tea or a cold water infusion. Okay. Slippery elm, essentially the same as marshmallow as far as I'm concerned. There may be some tannins in it as well. It's a better bulk laxative than marshmallow is. It really does kind of gel up. And I find that for people that are sensitive to psyllium as a bulk laxative, I often will use slippery elm instead. One, it can have a nutritive effect. So you've got this high in fiber, but the early settlers used to use slippery elm in the wintertime when they were getting low on food. They could go out and gather the inner bark of the tree and use it to make porridge, and it could basically keep you alive. So it's useful as a food, kind of like how oatmeal is in cases. Also for people that are convalescing and recovering from some kind of illness, or maybe they have a lot of inflammation in the gut, it can really help with that. So that's why it has a nutritive effect there. So like marshmallow, it's a demulcent, but a little stronger bulking agent than the marshmallow has. Also, as I mentioned, I do not recommend using this in tincture form. I think it would be a waste of money, and it would probably do nothing if you gave someone, a teaspoon of this. Okay. So flax, like marshmallow and slippery elm, this too has a bulking agent. Okay, so getting your patients, if they have, let's say, sluggish bowels or chronic constipation, I would recommend doing a couple tablespoons of flaxseed on a daily basis. So from a digestive standpoint, its main action is it's a bulk laxative. In addition to that, the lignans that are in there have phytoestrogenic effects. And those lignans that are in there will be metabolized by your gut flora to make mammalian lignans that then help with prostate cancer and breast cancer. So it's really useful. Also, because these lignans are a type of polyphenol, they are great antioxidants. They probably have some gentle anti-inflammatory effects as well. Also, they appear to have some antidiarrheal properties related to the bulk laxative effect. Remember, if you have water and you pour it into your hand, it's much harder to hold on to than if you pour Jello into your hand. So any kind of bulking agent will be better for diarrhea and give you better bowel control. But mostly, but in addition to that, it may be that some of the other constituents have some anti-secretory effects that kind of help to regulate the bowels a little bit. But consuming it on a daily basis, great for constipation and also good for diarrhea. So people with IBS, having them consume something like flaxseed daily would be a good dietary lifestyle change that would help them. I never use this as tinctures. I mean, you could, if you just wanted the phytoestrogenic effect, you certainly could do an alcohol extract. But if you want the mucilage, doing a tincture would be useless for it. Okay. Some books say that you have to use that people should consume like flaxseed with caution during pregnancy and during lactation because it's a phytoestrogen. You know, my argument against that is I don't think my opinion can be changed because I would like to know. My wife ate flaxseed on and off throughout the pregnancy, and there's no evidence that it's caused any harm to our son. And the reason why I think there's benefit in doing it because of the rich omega-3 content and because of the fiber. I think it's a good thing to consume. I guess the fear would be is that if you have a young boy, because there's phytoestrogenic properties associated with it, that it could cause gynecomastia or affect development of male organs, presumably. But I don't think that's the case. I really don't. I appreciate that the amount of circulating estrogen in the woman is going to be pretty strong estrogens. It's going to be significant to a woman that's pregnant. And I can't imagine flax would have that significant effect because it just has a very slight modulating effect, right? So I don't think it would stimulate or suppress it dramatically. I think it would just maybe curb it a little bit. And a plant-based diet tends to be high in phytoestrogens in general. So if you're worried about flax, you should be worried about soy. You should be worried about grapes and peanuts and lots of other things as well. So, but if some evidence comes out saying that it's causing problems, I would stop using it or recommending it. So with pregnant women, I say we just don't really know. I wouldn't overdo it. Okay. So I said golden flax. It's essentially the same as brown flax. The golden flax has higher amount of those phytoestrogens in it, and is richer in the phytoestrogen / antioxidants. So I usually buy the golden ones, but I don't think it makes a difference. They're both good. Generally speaking, I tend to grind. So Danielle is asking about powdered versus whole seeds. The whole seeds do make do contain the mucilage as well. Just like if you take chia seeds and you add it to water, you'll see that they'll expand. So I assume the whole reason why they contain mucilage is because when the seed is developing, it absorbs water to create like a little protective like force field around it that's rich in water, so it's more drought resistant. I suspect that's why it exists. So you don't have to grind the seeds to get the mucilage extracted, but if you want to get uh, the benefits of the polyphenols, the those lignins that are in there, you have to grind it because we won't be able to break the seed, the seed down in our digestive tract. We don't have a gullet. We're not birds. So I prefer if people grind it themselves, buy a little coffee grind and grind it at home before they use it. Um, that way, it's less likely to go rancid. Because the other thing with flaxseed is because it's rich in the omega threes, which it's great to get more omega threes in your diet if you can. So you always want to have more omega threes and omega sixes in your diet. And flax and chia and walnut and hemp are all really good sources from nuts and seeds. And then fish oil supplements is another source, but they're a different type. I think they're both useful. Both the omega threes from plants and from animals are great, and they work slightly different. Um, so I usually recommend powdered seeds and make it up every week or so and keep it in the fridge so it doesn't go rancid because of those omega threes. So psyllium seed husk is a classic bulk laxative. So I don't recommend it as much as I do flax. Flax I recommend to every single patient because I think everyone would benefit from a little more fiber in their diet. Psyllium seed husk is something I use if I believe that they have, let's say, chronic constipation and they're not getting the benefits from having some flax in the morning or flax and chia in the morning. I might get them to add on some psyllium. We buy this in bulk and we have little bags we give out to the patients, and they can just add a teaspoon to water and shake it up and take it as needed. Um, the benefit of psyllium, it's very useful for chronic constipation. That's why the brand Metamucil, which you can buy in any drugstore, is primarily psyllium seed husk that's been ground up and flavoring added to it to make it a little bit nicer tasting. But you can buy the whole thing and just sell it yourself if you want in bulk. And that's what we do. We have little bags and stuff that we sell in. Um, so in addition to constipation, it's great for diarrhea. I used it when I had giardia, and it really, really helped give me better bowel control and reduce the frequency of that. So it appears to have an anti-secretory effect or maybe a modulating effect on the secretions in the intestinal tract. Because can't be too suppressive because it's good for both diarrhea and constipation. So I like that. I would much prefer if someone did psyllium than something like Imodium because we don't want to suppress the diarrhea. We just want to get better bowel control. Because of the mucilage, it has all that mucilage in it, has a demulcent action. So I don't generally use psyllium seed husk for things like heartburn and gastritis, but I guess you could use it. There are some phenolic compounds or some other anti-inflammatory compounds, and I'm sure there's some phenolic compounds, but there's some anti-inflammatory compounds. And then finally, like I said, bulk laxative and antidiarrheal is great. The FDA has a warning on whole psyllium seed husk. So you can get the husks or you can get the powder. I recommend using the powder. The reason why is the husk tends to, there's been case reports of people mixing it with water and getting it stuck in their esophagus and being a bit of a choking hazard. So I would be more inclined to recommend the powder because it doesn't appear to have that effect, or to do it as a capsule. Okay. Regardless, if you're going to take it, you have to use lots of water when you're taking psyllium. Another concern is when you have a condition like Crohn's disease. In general, fiber with a condition like Crohn's is somewhat conflicting evidence. There are some people who say you should not take fiber if you have Crohn's disease, and there's research that shows that taking fiber with Crohn's disease is beneficial. Okay, and so I would say it depends on how you're taking the fiber and where the person is at with the Crohn's disease. So with Crohn's disease, what can happen is with chronic inflammation, there can be very serious narrowing of the small intestines. And when that happens, if you were to take a whole bunch of psyllium and pop it in someone's digestive tract, then it could actually act as like an obstruction in the bowels, which wouldn't be good. So there's been case reports of someone being recommended a whole bunch of fiber when they're with Crohn's disease and aggravating and causing a lot of severe pain. So you would want to use it with caution. Now, if it wasn't progressed that far and they didn't have any stricturing or narrowing in the bowels, then I would certainly recommend Saline Seed Husk with giving them that warning that, yeah, you might want to start really low and see how your body responds to it, and show them that there's research showing benefit and also that it can cause harm in excess. So you have to be a little bit careful with that. Same thing with acute constipation. Anytime you have someone who's severely constipated and they haven't had a bowel movement in a few days, you don't want to give them a whole bunch of fiber because it'll just make the situation worse. So you maybe start with an osmotic laxative like magnesium or a stimulating laxative like Senna before jumping into the bulk laxatives, okay? And again, because you're primarily trying to get the mucilage, that's the main active ingredient that we want from the psyllium, you don't want to go and give it to them in a tincture form because it's just a waste of money, okay? Now, psyllium belongs to the Plantago genus, and there are two other varieties. There's English plantain and greater plantain that are used historically in herbal medicine. Now, the leaf and the seeds and the whole plant are used in both. Like psyllium, they contain mucilage, so you could do it as a usually it's not the seeds that are sold. It's usually the leaf and the whole plant that's used. So it does have mucilage in it, and it also has some other interesting phytochemicals, including various phenolic compounds and iridoids that aucubin is in other herbs that are used for allergies and inflammation. This iridoid glycoside here, this particular iridoid has some anti-inflammatory and anti-allergic effects. This verbascoside is also an antioxidant and has some anti-inflammatory effects. In general, these appear to have some antispasmodic effects. I've used it internally for people with just inflammation, ulcers, um, uh, inflammatory sort of bowel disease issues because of all the properties there. Okay. That's the greater plantain. This grows everywhere wild. If you step outside uh, of the college and walk 5 feet, you're bound to see some either greater plantain or the other variety, the narrow leaf plantain or the English plantain. It just grows wild everywhere in North America. I think I should just take a quick little break. So let's take a break here for 10 minutes and we'll come back at 10:40 and we'll continue with the herbs, okay? All right, we're back. Just going through. I noticed Camellia sent me a question. Do we need to know the inflammation pathway and the slide after it? No, you do not need to know that for the exam. Do we do female Latin words end in officinalis and male Latin words name in officinale? So basically officinalis and officinale are the same word, but there's gender differences between the two. I think the officinale is more gender neutral. I don't remember. The point is, some herbs like ginger will use Zingiber officinale, while marshmallow uses Althea officinalis. I don't know why they choose one over the other. I would never ask you to know if it's officinale or officinalis. In my mind, they're essentially the same, and I probably have accidentally written it as Zingiber officinalis instead of officinale, but not a really important thing. Another question she was asking: what is the difference between anti-protozoal and anti-parasitic? Um, I would say that a protozoa is a type of parasite. So something that's anti-protozoal will also be anti-parasitic, but something that's anti-parasitic may not be anti-protozoal, right? Because it depends if protozoa is a certain specific type of parasite. So it's becoming more specific, and that maybe in the old days we didn't know the difference between amoebas and protozoas and all that necessarily because you couldn't see them with a naked eye. So for old herb books, they wouldn't necessarily go into that much distinction, but for the newer ones, they may do that. Okay. Another question: how much psyllium should you take to be effective for diarrhea or constipation? Um, the dosing for it, I don't remember what the dosing is off the top of my head. Usually, what I do is I get someone to start off with 1 teaspoon uh, and just do that a couple times a day, and then they can increase it accordingly. Like you might end up taking, let's say, 2 teaspoons 3 times a day for a really dramatic diarrhea. With constipation, if things are sluggish and you take too much, it can aggravate it because then you have all this fiber that's kind of making you feel bloated. So I usually get people to ease into it, starting off with it. Maybe if they're really sensitive, doing 1 teaspoon and then increase it to 2, and then maybe get up to 3 or 4 teaspoons. I don't remember the dose. I would guess it's probably a couple teaspoons, 2 to 3 times a day is what would be the maximum dose for it. Okay. Moving on. Sorry, voice quality is not good. Is that better now? I was kind of sitting further back from the microphone. How's the sound quality? Is it okay now, or is it still a little poor? Anybody? Um, Sound is fine. It's okay. It's better now. Okay, thank you. Um, should we know? Camille is asking another question. Should we know the specific chemicals in each plant? Catapult, verbascicide. Um, Let me see what I wrote up. I'll be. I would say. Um, I'm pretty certain I did not ask a question. For example, English plantain, uh, which I never asked the question. Which of the following herbs contains verbascicide? Like I didn't do that. Um, I might say something along the lines of like, which of the following herbs contain mucilage, phenolic glycosides like verbascicide, flavonoids, and an iridoid glycosides? Is it A, licorice? Is it B, chamomile? I might do something like that. I don't think I would be that specific, and if I did, it would be really like something. I could say it like lycoflavone because I've talked about that a few different places, or glycyrrhiza, and I've talked about that in a few different places. So that if you've seen it in a few places, chances are I'd be more likely to ask you that um, than asking you if it's like if I've only shown up once, I'm not going to ask you some obscure chemical you've only seen once. I wouldn't probably ask you to do that. And if I did, it would be in the question with a few other things in it, so it wouldn't be the only thing you'd have to know. So, another question. Should herbs like licorice, slippery elm, marshmallow be taken with or without food generally? I don't know. See, if you took marshmallow and slippery elm with food, uh, it would be like taking fiber with your food. Licorice is not necessarily, because it works through different mechanisms. It's hard to know whether it's more effective or not. If you take it with a meal, if you're trying to have a drug-like effect, it'll slow down the absorption a bit. If you take it away from food, you might get better absorption, but I don't know. It's not always clear if it makes that much of a difference. So certain things I might get them to take on an empty stomach, like chamomile if they've got a little inflammation, or sipping on slippery elm and marshmallow between meals if they have a little bit of reflux as needed. But uh, generally speaking, I don't really. I think you're better off if the person's going to have a hard time remembering when to take it. I just tell them just to take it whenever they can. If it's before meals, then so be it. Okay. But there may be a few things where you take it, like bitters. I get them to take a little before if they can remember, and some of the demulcents may be as needed. Okay. Now, moving on to licorice. So licorice has many actions. I'm calling it a demulcent in this sort of upper left-hand corner there, because that's one of the main indications as a GI herb, is that we could use it as a demulcent. But in herbal medicine, it has a lot of different unrelated indications associated with it. Okay. And depends on the compounds. The glycyrrhizin that's in it, that is removed in products like DGL. The glycyrrhizin has steroid-like properties associated, or not steroid, but it does modulate some of the steroidal compounds in the body, primarily the cortisone. I can't remember if I listed it here or not. I remember we discussed it earlier on. No, I didn't. And so, because it influences cortisone and cortisol and aldosterone indirectly, it can affect that. That property of licorice, it can often be used as an adrenal support, or as a adrenal tonic, and that's because it inhibits the breakdown of cortisone, and that keeps it elevated a little bit. So if someone who's like chronically burnt out, you got to boost the adrenal glands and make use of whatever the cortisone that they're producing, then taking licorice can help elevate some of the stress hormones that can become depleted with chronic stress. That glycyrrhizin compound also has some great antiviral properties. Like it also has a saponin, so it might help with the absorption of some of the other compounds. It probably is responsible for the hepatoprotective action that licorice has. So licorice is often used in tinctures with, or in formulas with people with hepatitis. So lots of good things. Now, the demulcent and anti-ulcer properties is not associated with the glycyrrhizin. It's associated with a compound that's a lycoflavone. Okay, and that's a precise, like that little compound there is kind of unique to licorice. I think there's other herbs that probably have this type of effect, but this flavonoid is responsible for preventing the remember when we talked about earlier with ibuprofen, how it inhibits the enzyme cyclooxygenase 2 and cyclooxygenase 1, and it suppresses mucus production. So this lycoflavone compound stimulates the productions of the prostaglandins that are involved with making mucus. So it does the opposite. So it has a gastroprotective or an anti-ulcer effect by stimulating mucus production. And so that's why it acts as a demulcent, not because it contains the mucilage, but because it indirectly stimulates your own body's mucus production. So the mucilaginous herbs like the slippery elm and the marshmallow and even the psyllium, they contain lots of fiber that coats the esophagus, and that's how it acts as a demulcent through supplementing plant-based mucus, i.e., mucilage. Okay, licorice, if you add it to water, does not produce mucilage. It produces the lycoflavone helps stimulate the mucus production. Now, as an aside, that mucus production that you get from the lycoflavone is related to certain prostaglandins. And I've mentioned this before. Those same prostaglandins that help with stomach ulcers also stimulate uterine contractions as well. So licorice would be contraindicated with women who are pregnant. I don't imagine a little bit of licorice would be a big deal, but it could be problematic if you're taking a lot of it and you're pregnant. The drugs, there are certain drugs that are prostaglandins. I think it's PGE2, I don't remember. There are prescription drugs that are given sometimes to people with chronic stomach ulcers to stimulate mucus production. And those drugs, which are going to be even stronger than licorice or DGL, are absolutely contraindicated during pregnancy because of that effect. So that's why licorice and even DGL is contraindicated during pregnancy. And I used to incorrectly think that it probably wouldn't be a big deal during pregnancy, but it could be. And I don't want to get in trouble with pregnant women. If a woman has a miscarriage, you don't want to even be remotely the cause of that. Okay, so what I'll say is that if you take DGL, the deglycerinated licorice, the benefit of that is you have a product that you can take as a chewable capsule or as a tablet or as a capsule or a powder form, and it's very, very safe. The only safety concern I would have is being maybe avoiding during pregnancy. That would be the one thing I would avoid. But otherwise, it's very safe. It doesn't have any issues with raising your blood pressure. Licorice in general, if you take too much of it for long term, the glycyrrhizin in it does elevate blood pressure because it basically has it mimics aldosterone in the body and can result in water retention, which leads to an elevation of blood pressure. And this is a serious risk. So if someone came in and they had a history of high blood pressure, I wouldn't use licorice. I would use DGL. And there's also the convenience factor that you can get it as chewable little capsules and things like that. Okay. Now, if I could ask, one person's having a weak connection. Has the sound been an issue for anyone? I'm gonna maybe turn off my camera because one person's having. I just don't know if it's everyone or just one person's. So you've probably seen enough of me for one day. So I'll turn me off and let me know what the rest of you have. So everyone else has good internet connection. So no one's having an issue except for one person. So that could be your Wi-Fi connection or someone else in your house is downloading videos in the background or whatever. So, or something related. Okay. But I turned it off. Another person's having sound issues. Two people have sound issues, two people don't. But I think it's more the individuals. But we'll try it without the photos or the movie, and we'll see what happens. Oh, and one person at CCNM is having issues and someone else isn't. So you know what? It could just be how close you are to the remote. I don't know the router. Um, so that's licorice. What else? Licorice is awesome. It's a good herb. It's worth reading about licorice and all these herbs, reading them in more detail in any of the herb books. Read a couple and you get a better sense of it. But I'm kind of giving you a summary of it because I could spend hours on each one going through every single study. But it's worth becoming familiar with a few of these guys in more detail if you want. So marigold, or sometimes called calendula as well. I typically use this as a vulnerary herb for topical conditions. So mostly for sunburn. I've got a little cream that it's calendula oil that if I get a sunburn, then I'll just throw it on my face, and it helps to decrease the redness and hopefully maybe prevent some skin cancer as well. The main active compounds are triterpenoids. There are some carotenoids that give it this nice yellow color. So it has zeaxanthin and xanthan and probably a little beta carotene as well. And so maybe those guys are partly responsible for some of its phytoprotective or photoprotective effects. Internally, you could use it in a formula for a stomach ulcer. Chamomile is my primary go-to for as a vulnerary, internal vulnerary. But marigold would be one you could use because it has different phytochemicals. Like the triterpenoids are different than what you get in chamomile. Chamomile has some essential oils. It has some bioflavonoids, and then it has some sesquiterpenes that are responsible for its anti-inflammatory effects as well. And so I think having a ulcer formula with marigold in addition to the chamomile might be superior because you're getting different phytochemicals that might work by a different mechanism. That's all theoretical. The other thing is there is some slight antimicrobial properties associated with marigold. It's not a major one, but it exists there. So again, for wound healing, stomach ulcers, inflammation in the gut, I might include this in one of the formulas, okay? So meadowsweet, the one indication I would remember for meadowsweet is that it's an anti-inflammatory and an antacid. Now, I don't use this a lot, but people, I do use it sometimes. People primarily use this for heartburn. I know that herbalists will use it for different types of heartburn, whether it's an ulcer or just occasional heartburn. And it works well. Usually with heartburn, I want to determine, is it due to reflux or is it due to a stomach ulcer or gastritis? So for reflux, I'd be less inclined to use it over something, but it would still be beneficial. You could still use it. Now, what's interesting about it is that meadowsweet does contain salicylic acid, some kind of glycoside of salicylic acid. We know that salicin and salicylic acid in general does have that ulcer generating effect because it's basically like aspirin, and aspirin causes stomach ulcers. But for some reason, meadowsweet is used as an anti-ulcer herb. So it's interesting that although there's one compound in it that can cause ulcers, something else in it must be having a protective effect against ulcers. And we know that the tannins in meadowsweet may decrease stomach acid. Maybe there's other things that help to stimulate some kind of mucus. I don't know. I mean, it's not a demulcent, but I don't know how it acts as an antacid or sorry, as an anti-ulcer. I do know that tannins in general could have an anti-secretory effect and decrease stomach acid, and it may inhibit the formation of histamine as well, which is used as a chemical messenger for generating stomach acid. So historically, it was used for heartburn and digestive issues where there is a burning sensation. Because it contains salicylic acid, like you would find in willow bark and other sources of salicylic acid, it's been used for arthritis and joint pain, much the same way you'd use an anti-inflammatory drug. It's also been used for fevers, so it's used to bring down a fever if someone has, some kind of infection. So for me, the only thing I really use it for is certain cases where I want to bring down the stomach acid a bit. And I would use this more if people weren't coming in on drugs like proton pump inhibitors. I probably would be using this more for more chronic cases of heartburn if I needed to kind of bring down the stomach acid at times and heal an ulcer. But because we're kind of working in an integrated fashion, sometimes I may not choose to use this. What else about this? In general, you got to be careful about people, if they had a salicylic acid sensitivity, you'd want to use meadowsweet with caution. I think that's worth remembering for the exam. I don't know if it's on the exam, but I generated a question that basically said, which of the following herbs would be, contraindicated with someone who was sensitive to aspirin and other salicylates? Is it A, chamomile, B, meadowsweet, etc.? Okay. So I would love it if someone did a comparison of meadowsweet to aspirin or ibuprofen and did a comparison of how effective were they at decreasing pain and what was the prevalence of stomach ulcers between the two groups, because that would be kind of a neat thing to see in a study, I think. Now, agrimony is it's a herb that hasn't received as much research as some of the herbs. Its primary actions in herbal medicine is used as an astringent, slightly bitter, and also for ulcers. And so I'll sometimes use this in formulas for stomach ulcers or for ulcerative colitis. It has some anti-diarrheal properties. I remember when you read the old indications, they would use it for grumbling appendicitis. That was one of the main key points for this. And so I think there might be some antimicrobial properties associated with it as well. I don't really know what they are. And so I don't feel like I understand this as well as I would like to from a phytochemical standpoint and from its precise mechanisms. But historically, it was valued for digestive issues where you needed some type of astringent compound. So like using oak or witch hazel or geranium, cranesbill, this could be used. The volatile oils and the coumarins, maybe they're going to have probably some antispasmodic effects, some antimicrobial effects, and the main astringent compounds are going to be hydrolyzable tannins. Okay, so again, it's not a primary herb that I use a lot. I've used it a couple times. Maybe I should use it more. But because I'm using other ones, I don't know if they're better or not. And because I don't understand it from a research standpoint, I tend not to use it as much. And I think it's probably a great herb, but one I just don't have as much experience with. But certainly traditional herbalists like it and they use it a lot in formulas. Like any astringent herb, watch out for nutrient absorption as well. Cranesbill. Cranesbill is extremely astringent. I would say it's much more astringent than agrimony is. This is a wildflower that grows in North America. This would be a plant that was introduced into Western herbalism from North American Indians and First Nations people. The root is used pretty much the same way that you might use oak and witch hazel. It's used primarily as an astringent. We know that tannins can have an anti-secretory effect, so that's why it often will have an antacid effect. It can help with stomach ulcers. It also has anti-diarrheal effects. The tannins are rich in phenolic compounds, so there's some anti-inflammatory properties and antioxidant properties as well. Okay, so this is used in a classic herbal formula used over 100 years ago called Robert's formula, where they would combine cranesbill with slippery elm with golden seal, and then there's some other things that they would sometimes throw into the mix. And that was used for different types of inflammatory gastrointestinal inflammation in the gastrointestinal tract. So it could be ulcers or colitis and things like that. Okay. Again, watch it for nutrient absorption. I would say both oak and witch hazel, you could use it for the same indications as the cranesbill because they're just basically a pure astringent compound that consists primarily of hydrolyzable tannins. So you don't need to memorize a monograph for each one. Just know that cranesbill, witch hazel, and different species of oak. So you can use red oak, white oak, black oak. There's different oaks that could be used in different countries. They're all very, very astringent. Okay. And they're all used, in my mind, interchangeably because the astringency is also associated with these hydrolyzable tannins. Now, contrast those three guys to bilberry. bilberry is different primarily because it consists mostly of condensed tannins. That's the main active ingredient. So these anthocyanidins and proanthocyanidins that are in it are responsible for the blue color. The bilberry is kind of like the Northern European blueberry. It's a cousin of our blueberry that grows here, and actually, our blueberry here isn't just one genus; it's a whole bunch of, it's one genus. It's a whole bunch of different species of berries that kind of fit under that category of being a blueberry. What I would say is the blueberries that we commonly eat here are less astringent than the bilberry. So the bilberry has greater astringency than our blueberries do. I read in one article it's about 5 times as astringent, and because of that, they're better suited for when you need that sort of a gentle astringent herb. So they're less astringent than witch hazel and cranesbill and those guys, but significantly more astringent than the blueberries that we eat here. Where I've seen it used is in some of the German textbooks for the herbalist. They recommend it for childhood diarrhea. So infantile diarrhea, where you have children where you don't want to give them anything too strong and you want to give them something that's palatable. You take the dried bilberry flowers and add a little water to it and provide it in that fashion. Okay. I've used it a little bit. I think it helps. It's hard to say, but it wouldn't be the only thing that I would do. Now, just as an aside for infantile diarrhea, you could also go with something like chamomile tea would help a little bit. You could give them increase their fiber using some mucilaginous herbs like flax or chia or a little bit of psyllium or things like that as well. But bilberry is one that you could use, and it certainly is one of the main indications when you read some of the German herbalist stuff. Okay. So moving on to some antiemetics. So we already mentioned peppermint has some antiemetic properties to it. So it can be used for nausea. Smelling peppermint oil, the essential oil, just inhaling it, smelling it can have benefits. Now, my first choice antiemetic herb is ginger. Now, Zingiber officinale is the Latin name, and contrast that to Althea officinalis. Is the species is either officinale for ginger, and then marshmallow has officinalis. As I mentioned earlier, it's the same thing, same word, just a slightly different male, female, gender thing with it. I don't know why they chose one over the other. Maybe Zingiber is maybe ginger is more gender neutral and marshmallow is more female or male. I don't know. Okay. So ginger is an awesome herb. It's used in lots and lots of different formulas in Chinese medicine and Asian medicine. We've adopted the herbal medicine in Western herbalism. It's a main herb there. It does not grow in colder climates, so it only grows in tropical areas. You can find it widespread use everywhere from the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, Southeast Asia, and then to East Asia as well. So I think most tropical places will grow this. It doesn't grow in desert areas, though, so it's more of a sort of rainforest, sort of hot, humid climate. Its primary action is that antiemetic action is associated with the gingerol and some of the compounds similar to gingerol. That's not the essential oil component. It's a larger component, so it will not evaporate when you make a decoction. You boil it for a long period of time. Things like the zingiberine is one of the essential oils in it. That will evaporate if it's boiled, on the stove for hours and hours at a time. So presumably some of the carminative actions associated with ginger is related to the essential oils, and then some of the other properties are related to the gingerol. They have more of not a general effect like an essential oil does, but a very specific effect that it targets certain serotonin receptors, the 5-HT3 receptors, that are involved with regulating GI motility and also with nausea and vomiting. And so it's having like an actual pharmacological drug-like action on the body to inhibit nausea, which is pretty cool. The other thing I like about gingerol, the compound, is that because it's a phenolic compound, it appears to have some great antioxidant, anti-inflammatory effects, and it may protect the liver, presumably because of the antioxidant effects. Ginger is sometimes referred to as a pungent bitter. So it has some of the properties that a bitter compound has, but it doesn't taste bitter. It has a pungent like taste. And what that means is it has that kind of a spicy, warm, hot sort of flavor. So other pungent things would include things like uh, clove has some pungent properties to it. Cayenne would. What else is pungent? Anything that kind of stimulates some of those hot receptors, I think, has a pungent effect. So cinnamon and ginger are two of the most commonly consumed ones. So although it's not a bitter, it does promote digestion. It has stomachic properties, and for some mechanism, I don't know what it is. Ginger also increases bile production, so it has a cholinergic and a cholagogue effect. The other neat thing with ginger is the 5-HT3 receptors that are involved with nausea and vomiting and GI motility also have an effect on anxiety. And so when you stimulate them, it causes nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and anxiety. And if you modulate them or block those receptors, not only does it improve digestive symptoms, but it also makes you less anxious. So it would be a good herb for someone if they're having a little bit of, uh, you know, butterflies from having to write an exam or go on stage. Maybe having a little bit of ginger tea might help to settle the stomach down and make them feel a little less anxious. And it's funny because ginger, when I learned it originally, it wasn't a primary indication for it was anxiety. But when I was reading about the pharmacology, I said, well, if it blocks that, I wonder if it's going to work for anxiety. And what do you know? There's actual clinical trials that showed ginger as an anxiolytic, which is kind of neat. Um, Ginger, you can make it as a decoction. If you get ginger powder, you can make it as a tea just because adding hot water to powder will extract the main compounds pretty quick. But if you're using the whole root, then you may have to boil it for 5 or 10 minutes before you get enough of it extracted. It's very, very safe. So there's no real concerns that I have with it. You can pretty much drink as much as you want. The only side effects could be a little bit of reflux because of the carminative action associated with it. And I've certainly seen that before where people drink a lot of ginger and then lay down afterwards. They get a little bit of reflux from it. The other thing I'd be concerned about, just as an aside, I didn't really mention it here, but it's a bit of a blood thinner. So if someone was on medications that thin the blood, you always want to double check anything you give them to make sure it doesn't interact. And ginger is something that does have some blood thinning effects. Okay. Um, The good thing is it's established to be safe during pregnancy. So it's nice that a woman with morning sickness, this would be my go-to herb, my number one herb that I would recommend them. And they can do it as a candy or as, if they needed that, you can also buy you can buy it in capsule forms as well. So apparently, you guys, I lost some sound there. So how's the sound? Am I still connected here? I don't think I can disconnect anything else. Yeah. So it sounds good for some people, not for other people. Uh, is onion pungent? I think it's pungent. I have to Google that, but I'm pretty sure onion is pungent. I would say it falls in that because garlic would be. Um, this is what Google's for. I'm just going to Google and see because I'm curious. What do we got? Pungent herbs. Garlic, horseradish, radish. What other ones? Mustard, Tabasco sauce, red peppers. It doesn't say it, but I'd be pretty. If garlic's pungent, I would say onions are going to be falling. Yeah, onions are too. Yep. So now, both turmeric and ginger are in the same family. They're in the Zingerbaceae family. And if you look at the ginger plant and the turmeric plant, they're not roots, they're rhizomes. And so if you pull off one of those finger-like projections there and plant it in the ground, a new plant will come up. And that's different than roots. Roots won't do that. Tap roots won't do that. If you take a ginseng root or a burdock root and cut it in half and plant it, you might get one plant if you're lucky, but you're not going to get two. So this could make multiple ones. They're in the same family. They have similar indications. They're both really good anti-inflammatories. I would say turmeric is probably one of the best anti-inflammatory herbs. Ginger, I would say it's not going to be as potent anti-inflammatory as turmeric is, but the advantage over that ginger has is it's easier to make into a tea. And curcumin doesn't really dissolve in hot water as well as the gingerol does. And so it's not quite as good as a tea. Now, I do add it sometimes to my shake, just blend it up and throw it in there, just to get a little bit of my diet here and there, because in Indian, I think I mentioned earlier that in India, they have lower risk for, probably the lowest risk of cancer in the world, even though they're really polluted, because they consume a lot of curcumin in their diet. So it has a positive anti-cancer. It's good for heart disease. I think having some of this in your diet is not a bad thing to have on a regular basis. Sometimes I'll recommend it to patients in capsule forms. Sometimes I'll get them to add a little powder to mix it in with like some tomato juice, or mix it in with their food or a shake to try to get the benefits. And the polyphenols are great for that. GI symptoms, I would be looking at as anti-inflammatory properties for things like chronic colitis or Crohn's disease, like some sort of concern where there's lots of inflammation in the GI tract. I would include that as part of the formula. I've also used it for people going through cancer, and it has some positive effects on all sorts of different types of cancers. So especially if they have history of colon cancer or they're trying to prevent it or recurrence, maybe you get them to have turmeric on a daily basis. It does contain some essential oils. The curcumin molecule appears to have probably has some modulating effect on serotonin receptors as well in the gut, and maybe that's why it has an affinity for digestive issues as well. It's considered a carminative, also an antidepressant. So it's interesting because both ginger and curcumin appear to have some antidepressant effects. And there's some, obviously with depression, you want to make sure you understand what's causing the depression. Maybe you've got a bad job, bad relationship, history of abuse, whatever it is that you got to work on through some kind of mindfulness-based or cognitive-based therapy or counseling or whatever it may be. But if someone has a lot of inflammation in their body, that too can impact mood and depression. So if someone doesn't have any good reason to be depressed, but they're really inflamed because of an autoimmune thing or some kind of infection or whatever may be going on, turmeric appears to have antidepressant effects. I don't know if it's because it's just from reducing inflammation or if it modulates some of the serotonin or dopamine receptors as well. But there's more and more research coming out. And turmeric, I never really initially thought of it as being an antidepressant, but looks like there's some good stuff coming up. And so it wouldn't necessarily be my first choice for inflammation for an average as a antidepressant for the average person, but if someone was inflamed with arthritis and chronic pain, definitely I would throw it into the mix for all those reasons. Okay, like ginger, both turmeric, ginger, and other carminatives can aggravate reflux, so you have to be careful with that. Now, Indian frankincense is different than the frankincense little baby Jesus got. So this is a frankincense called Boswellia serrata. It grows in the kind of the northwest region of India, probably into Pakistan and Afghanistan as well, I would imagine. And it's a resin from a tree like myrrh is. So those are like little frankincense tears, or where they basically collect them from the tree. To get that photo, what I've actually done is I've rinsed them off with a little bit of rubbing alcohol and then backlit it, and they look quite pretty. Otherwise, they kind of look a little bit just like rocks, but it's quite pretty. The main constituents in the Indian frankincense responsible for its anti-inflammatory effects is the boswellic acid. And so boswellic acid is it's a type of triterpenoid that when you look back at the anti-inflammatory action slide, you'll see it seems to target a few different things. And unlike things like salicylic acid that inhibits the cyclooxygenase enzymes, this one targets the lipoxygenase enzyme. So it's a different pathway that leads to inflammation in the body. And the lipoxygenase may have positive effects for colitis and asthma that works by a slightly different mechanism. So often I'll use formulas that have Indian frankincense along with curcumin and maybe another herb as well, like devil's claw or something. We didn't really talk too much about that, to exert its anti-inflammatory effects. So someone with, let's say, inflammatory bowel disease, long-term use of something like Indian frankincense might be beneficial. I think there's some clinical trials have been done. I think there should be more that are done. I suspect that in the future there'll be more and more research coming out to support this. But for now, I would use this in combination with other things for arthritis, inflammatory bowels, asthma, even certain autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, etc. So myrrh, to get the nice little photograph, I did the same thing, rinsed it with rubbing alcohol, and then backlit it. And I'm not going to give this to anyone to eat. This is what the raw resin looks like. For some reason, it comes in much larger. It's not like the tears. Like these are really quite small. Like this is actually, well, kind of actual size. The myrrh is much larger. Myrrh is an awesome herb. This is one of the plants that was given to baby Jesus. So frankincense, myrrh, and gold. So you can see it was valued in ancient times. And both the myrrh and the different types of frankincense are burned as incense. So they have religious purposes. It's believed to dispel negativity, bad spirits, whatever it is. In addition, it's an awesome antimicrobial. So I would use this as one of my main herbs in an antimicrobial formula. So often I'll do golden seal, myrrh, podarco, maybe wormwood. I might mix it up. But where I've seen the research for this, looking into it, a lot of the research is done in the Middle East because that's where the tree comes from. And there's some studies in Egypt where they're doing clinical trials showing benefits against certain protozoa. And the protozoas are like Giardia, so may have benefits against a type of like Giardia infections for diarrhea. Also for trichomonas, which is more of a vaginal infection, doing vaginal suppositories with it might be beneficial. So the main thing I would use this for is different types of infections. There's an analgesic effect. It actually decreases pain as well. So someone who had digestive issues, lots of abdominal pain associated with some type of infection, and you didn't know what it was, I throw this into the mix because it seems to have broad-acting effect on bacteria and probably viruses and protozoa and a whole bunch of other things. And it likely has some anti-inflammatory effects. When you look at the active ingredients, they're kind of a unique little group of phytochemicals that are sesquiterpenoids, but they have a furanol molecule on it. And I don't know a lot of things except for the furanocoumarins that have that furanol compound. But they don't have any specific names. It took me a while to find out what was in it. So I suspect there's other things. There's probably some essential oils in here. There's going to be probably some triterpenoids as well, but it's believed that these furanol sesquiterpenoids are the main antimicrobials in there. So great herb. I love it. I use it frequently for respiratory, for digestive, for if I'm trying to kill off bugs in the gut. The one thing I would say you have to use it with caution is pregnancy. It appears to be unsafe or likely unsafe to use during pregnancy. Because it hasn't been given a stamp of approval for pregnancy, I'd be inclined to stay clear of it. Okay. So podarco, this herb is essentially, in my mind, the same as black walnut. There's slight differences, I suspect, but they both contain the active compounds naphthoquinones. So podarco contains lapitol, black walnut contains juglone. And both these, if you remember, I suspect that these nathoquinones work by disrupting mitochondrial function because CoQ10, which is part of the electron transport chain, is also a nathoquinone. And so I suspect that it uncouples the electron transport chain, generating free radicals and probably causing cell death that way. High amounts long term probably is an issue with people as well. I know that people working with certain hardwoods may be at increased risk of getting certain types of cancers, and that may be related to some of the resins. And I don't know if these are long term, if I'd want people taking this all the time. But short term, to kill off a bug, that would be the indication for it. In addition, it does have some mild laxative effects. Nathoquinones, structurally, they're a little bit like those anthraquinones. I don't think they're strong stimulating laxative, but certainly when you read some of the traditional indications, it's used as a laxative. So maybe it has some of that stimulating laxative effect that things like senna have, but it's significantly more gentle. I haven't really noticed taking it that I have, when I've taken it for infections, that I've seen any disruption in my bowels. It certainly it's probably okay. It also has a little bit of astringency too, probably because you're using a bark from a tree that would have, in addition to the lapitrol, you'll probably have other types of tannins in as well. So podarco and or wormwood, in my mind, could be used interchangeably in the formula. I've never used them both together. I think they're both great herbs. Black walnut is what grows wild here or grows around here. There's tons of black walnut in Guelph here, and actually in most places. And podarco, you'll have to go to South America to find it. And it's even when I was down in Mexico a couple of weeks ago, it's used as an ornamental tree. Sometimes it'll grow these big, big, beautiful pink flowers, so it's often used in ornamental trees in cities. So if you're in a tropical city in Central America or South America, it may have been planted because of these, provides shade and has some really nice, pretty flowers. So your stimulating laxative, senna is your main stimulating laxative. We've already talked about these. So this would be used primarily if someone has acute constipation, they haven't had a bowel movement for a couple of days, and they just want to evacuate the bowels and feel better. And this is where you might give it. I generally use more magnesium citrate acutely for constipation, just because it's easier to dose in some ways and tends not to cause the cramping that sometimes is associated with the stimulating laxatives. Also, it's not habit forming, so if they have some magnesium citrate around the house, they can just take a few hundred milligrams a day, and then if they have a bad day, they could crank up the dose and not have an issue. But senna definitely works. So it's just for practical purposes. If I didn't have magnesium, I'd use senna, but I don't need to, generally speaking. Often people will come in and they've been taking something like senna or Senecot on a weekly or daily basis for years, and the concern with that is it causes dependency. Would be the biggest issue. In general, you got to be careful giving this to people with inflammatory bowel disease because it can be a little irritating. Now, there are other stimulating laxatives that contain anthraquinone glycosides that could be used as well. There are a variety of buckthorns, different species that grow in both North America and also in Europe. So I can't remember now which one has been naturalized and introduced to North America and which one was native here. But I don't know if there's any difference between the three of them from a herbal medicine standpoint. They all contain the anthraquinone glycosides. They're primarily going to be used for stimulating laxatives. Looks like I lost you guys for a second. Be used as stimulating laxatives would be the main thing that you'd use these guys for. Okay, and so I think they're maybe a little more gentle than senna, but I can't say that for certain. We have some. I've used it a little bit, but I'm not. It's just not a main herb I would use. in practice. Okay. Where I might use these guys is if someone had a history of chronic constipation and I just want to get the bowels really moving well for a week or two, I might start with this and then switch over to other things later on. Someone says, can senna cause, I think you're trying to say brown bowel syndrome. Senna can stain the mucous membranes in the bowel, if that's what you're referring to. I'd say most people have brown bowels, but so I don't know what brown bowel syndrome is, but it can definitely stain the mucosa. And so if you go in for or for colonoscopy, they can see there's been some staining. They know whether you've been using these long term. And it might also change the color of your urine as well a little bit. So sometimes the anthraquinones can cause a little bit of a red tinge to the urine. Aloe resin, again, aloe resin is going to have the same actions as senna does. So the resin is the inner leaf. So the gel, if you take aloe vera leaves and you squeeze out all the gel, what's left behind is going to be like a yellow resin that can, when you dry it out, you'll see it's very bitter tasting, and it acts as a stimulating laxative. And so aloe vera gel is a bulk laxative with some immunostimulating modulating effects, maybe some vulnerary effects, while the resin is purely just a laxative. I think I've shown you this before. I can't remember. So with any of those stimulating laxatives that we talked about, they cause sodium to basically be pumped actively into the lumen of the bowel. That leads to water migration, and they also irritate and cause increased peristalsis. So if you take senna, you usually have a bowel movement. You take it, let's say 11 o'clock at night, you wake up in the morning, and at 7 a.m. you have a bowel movement. The other thing that's worth mentioning is with the anthraquinone glycosides is they will travel all the way through your stomach and small intestine for the most part intact. And then your gut flora will actually remove the glycoside that's attached to the anthraquinone and liberate it. So it's kind of like a prodrug, the anthraquinone glycoside, that gets activated by the bacteria in your large intestine, and then it has its effect. And that's why it takes about 8 hours for it to kick in, because it has to sort of move and work its way down there. Now, presumably, if you had something like SIBO, like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and you took an anthraquinone glycoside, probably it's going to work faster because those bacteria could remove the sugar in your small intestine. But yeah. So side effects, as I mentioned, discoloration of the urine. It can mess up your potassium levels because it's affecting your sodium influx in your bowels. Can cause staining of the bowels. Maybe that's the melanosis. And finally, it can cause a little bit of cramping pain. So if you use senna or some other stimulating laxative, you might want to couple it with a carminative like fennel or anise to make it feel better. Okay. Now the final one is castor oil. So castor oil, it's also a stimulating laxative, but the difference between castor oil and senna is it's not an anthraquinone glycoside. So the way it works is when you take castor oil internally, it contains ricinoleic acid, and ricinoleic acid is very irritating to the bowels. It also modulates certain prostaglandin receptors in the gut. As a result, when you take it, it will start acting when it comes in contact with the small intestines. And so it tends to promote a bowel movement in much less time. And within like 3 to 4 hours, I don't know if I wrote it down here. Yeah, 3 to 5 hours, it'll produce a bowel movement. And so if you needed to purge out both the small and the large intestine, and you wanted to do that quickly, let's say if the person had maybe a accidental poisoning and induce vomiting, and then you want to get them to purge out the bowels, that's where I would give castor oil for that. I might also consider using it if I was, thought maybe they had been colonized by some weird bug in both the small and the large intestine, and you wanted to see if you could flush it out. Maybe doing castor oil for a few days to try to purge out the entire intestinal tract might be indicated. So internally, it's also been used as a vermifuge. So for some reason, I was reading when castor oil, the ricinoleic acid, comes in contact with bile, it may form some kind of compound that's toxic to certain type of worms in the system. And so taking castor oil, if someone had worms, along with maybe some other herbs that have an anthelmintic effect, might be useful to just basically kind of wound or paralyze the worms and then flush it out with the castor oil. Okay, so I don't ever recommend castor oil on itself by itself for constipation because there's other options I have. Magnesium is my first choice. Senna would be my second choice. Castor oil, it because it affects certain prostaglandins, these PG3 or EP3 receptor. That one also appears to be involved with uterine contractions. And so I would say it's probably contraindicated to take or caution to use with pregnancy. Um, I know my wife with the first pregnancy we had, she was in labor for a little while, and we used castor oil internally at the advice of the midwife as an option to sort of induce labor, and I think it worked. And it's used a lot more historically. Um, but you wouldn't want to be taking this earlier on in the pregnancy. I don't think, to be honest with you, I don't think it's going to cause necessarily a miscarriage or cause someone to go into early labor unless the cervix has ripened. But can't say that for certain. So if you used it too early, it probably wouldn't do a whole lot, I don't think. So anyways, that's castor oil. I would say the take home with the castor oil and the anthraquinone glycosides. Anthraquinone glycosides, you take them at night, 8 hours later they kick in. And the castor oil, you take it because it works by a different mechanism. It'll work on both the small and large intestine, so it tends to kick in about 3 to 5 hours. So it's about half the time as the Senna does. So that could be a desirable thing or it could be undesirable. You don't want to have to necessarily wake up in the middle of the night to defecate. Unless you have to. So I'm going to start with the conditions. So with the GI conditions, let me just see how many slides I have here. A bunch of them. So when it comes to GI conditions, herbal medicines are really useful treatment approach for treating gastrointestinal conditions. It's not the only thing. I want to emphasize that no matter what, you have to work on the diet. So the general approach when I'm treating people with, let's say, IBS or chronic heartburn or reflux or bloating and gas or diarrhea or constipation, removing food sensitivities is done with every single patient with a gastrointestinal issue. And dairy and eggs are probably the two most common food intolerances. Often yeast bothers a lot of people. Beer and bread are main sources. Gluten affects some people, not everyone. And so there's lots of different foods that are an issue for people. So I will always remove food sensitivities. And that could be the cause of chronic heartburn or diarrhea or constipation, whatever it is in the person. And then the herbs are only used to relieve the symptoms, not treat the underlying cause necessarily. Now, if there was some chronic infection, then it might be that getting rid of the infection with herbs could be treating the underlying cause of the condition as well. In general, removing sugar is a good thing to do because sugar kind of messes up the gut. One, it can feed some of the bad bacteria or the yeast in your gut and cause bloating, gas, and discomfort. The second thing it might do is act as an osmotic laxative. And so if you eat too much sugar, even table sugar, which most people can absorb pretty good, if you overwhelm your body's ability to absorb it all, it's going to remain in the lumen of the bowel and basically cause loose stools and diarrhea and probably some gas. Okay. So in general, you want to get rid of food sensitivities, remove the sugar, and then also remove any kind of infection. That's because those things could be the cause, the underlying cause of what's going on. In addition, I might want to stimulate digestive function using bitters, because if you can get the digestion to work better, the food is broken down better, it's moving better. You're more likely to see improvements with things like heartburn and inflammation of the gut if digestion's better. Okay. Also with chronic conditions like gallstones, improving digestive function, improving bile flow would be beneficial as well. Probiotics, you could justify giving it to everyone, especially people with digestive issues. By improving bowel movement, so if someone has sluggish bowels, by just supplementing with some more fiber, either in the diet or as a pill or as a powder that they take, would be important. And then for most of the conditions, if we can identify and remove the root cause, that's fantastic. But sometimes we have to relieve symptoms until we determine what that cause is and remove it. So if someone has a lot of cramping pain because they have IBS due to a food intolerance, being able to drink some chamomile and peppermint tea could really help. Or if they're getting, heartburn and there's a lot of burning sensations, you may want to take a demulcent to coat the esophagus to make them feel better. Or in some cases, you may want to suppress stomach acid temporarily to make them feel better. And so that's another idea. So again, the general approach is going to be improving the diet, removing infections, and looking at possible food sensitivities. What did I say? I got distracted. So food sensitivities, remove the cause, look at the infections, take some probiotics, might even take some magnesium, take some fiber, and then control the symptoms. So all these actions we've already talked about already, and you guys can go through those on your own again. And depending on the condition that we have, different actions are more appropriate for some conditions than other ones. So I'll do indigestion, just sort of start with that. Indigestion, maybe I'll just wait on the conditions and go. Yeah, I'll wait on the conditions. It's 11:44. I'll end it there because it's a decent spot to end. Some of this stuff we'll be able to go through quicker because we've already covered all this information already, and I'll just be giving you some cases as we go through it. So I'll go through this next week. I've already given you stuff for exam review. Let me turn my camera on so you can see me. So I gave you some questions for exam review. So if we don't get to the exam review, that's what I would have gone through with you anyways. Next week, if we get through this, we can maybe go through some of the cases that I gave you on the exam review as well. But for the most part, I think we've covered everything that's going to be on the exam, and now we're just bringing it all together and talking about general approaches, how we would approach different types of conditions, and what actions you'd want to use, which herbs you might want to select, and then I'll give you some cases for some of them that I've collected in the last year or so. Actually, some of them from before that illustrate how effective the treatments have been. I don't have cases for everything, but I got quite a few cases. And I think you'll like that. So if I go over, I'll record it and we can go from there. Now I got a question here. Danielle is asking, is castor oil something to consider for SIBO, eliminate the overgrowth by purging? I think for SIBO, which is basically you get the wrong type of bacteria or too many bacteria growing in the small intestine where it's not supposed to, I would say that it might be something that you want to include in your treatment protocol. Sometimes with SIBO, people will just give antibiotics, but maybe by giving some antibiotics and then doing a little bit of trying to purge things out with some castor oil might be a treatment approach. It's not part of my protocol necessarily, but I've done that before. So this is a thought. Any other questions? See if I missed any other ones here. think I got all the questions. So at the request, we're ending on time, if not a little bit early. So I hope you guys have a wonderful week. Please review some of those exam questions. What I can do at the end of next lecture is that I'll stay an extra half hour, and I can I'll stay for an extra half hour. So let's say I'll be available till 12:30 or 12:20 next week. So if you guys want to stay later and do some exam review, or I'll just record it. I don't know how I'll do it right now. Then we can do that, okay? I would recommend, if you normally watch the recording, I would recommend doing the coming to the lecture next week, though, just because I'm not going to necessarily post all the exam review stuff that I do on the recording per se. I don't know if I will or not, okay? So I think that's good. Wait, how do you test for food sensitivities in children? You can do blood test. It's kind of tricky. The problem with the blood test, it costs about $307. There's some concerns with it. I can go through that another time, but sometimes I'll do the blood test, but I usually just get them to start with the main. We have a little handout called the red flag foods, so that's typically dairy and eggs and sugar and yeast containing foods and reduce gluten but not eliminate it, so a little bit more rye and come out over just having wheat. Get them to avoid bananas and pineapple and dried fruits. So I have my own little handout I've created over the years that it's a great place to start, and it's not a full-blown elimination, and we can usually see results with that. I have done the blood tests in people, and it definitely is useful, but the cost, and sometimes kids don't like getting the blood test done, so there's disadvantage, and it's controversial. So anyways, I hope that helped. You guys have a great week, and we will talk to you soon. Okay, bye for now.